Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam, and we're back on with Zachary Priehs to talk about the Rose Bowl. Zachary Priehs is a Syracuse student, and he is pursuing a master's in broadcast and digital journalism, and he loves college football. And I wanted to bring him on to talk about the Rose Bowl, talk about the matchup between Alabama and Michigan, because it's the most intriguing matchup in the college football playoff. It has the potential to be the best game in the entire history of the four-team playoff, and it could be, consequentially, the most intriguing game of the four-team playoff. You have Jim Harbaugh, who's searching for his first ever New Year's Six Bowl win at Michigan, which is sort of pathetic, but it's beside the point, up against Nick Saban. Nick Saban, a coach who's won 6 national titles at Alabama, several New Year's Six Bowls, and 9 SEC championships at Alabama. Except the difference is, when you look at statistics, when you look at FPI, when you look at betting odds, there's something weird. And that weird thing is that Michigan is the favorite. What do you think about that? Because that's strange, right?
Yeah, yeah, it does seem weird just to see Michigan favored against Alabama. Really, it seems weird to see any team favored against Alabama except Georgia these last couple of years. And and we talked about this a little bit before we went live. I do think Michigan's the better team, and we can get into a little bit more of the X's and O's and get into some of these more in-depth statistics as the show goes on. As we get later on into the show, rather. But I feel like Michigan's favored, although Alabama's seems to be getting, what is it, about 85% of the bets are for Alabama to cover. So it seems like the public is favoring Alabama, but there's something in Vegas that's saying, maybe Michigan wins this game. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. That number, I think, is 75%.
75.
I checked earlier today, but it's still strange nonetheless. I look at this game, and first and foremost, as a Michigan fan, it's kind of a weird spot. Michigan was favored last year against TCU, and they wet the bed. They were never going to beat Georgia in 2021. This game seems like really a middle ground, if I'm being honest. Not the same challenge as Georgia presented in 2021. Michigan's a better team than they were 2 years ago, and Alabama, I don't think, is a generational team like Georgia. But definitely tougher in theory than TCU. And they're coached by Nick Saban, and he has a month to prepare. And Nick Saban famously does well as an underdog. What do you think regarding, before we get into offense, defense for both teams and special teams and talking about statistics, what do you think about both teams' performances in the regular season?
Yeah, regular season wise, obviously Alabama's hot right now. They of course lost that game early on to Texas, which who knows, we might see a rematch in the national championship. But they lost that game to Texas at home, and then really faltered from there for a couple of games. They looked frankly horrendous against South Alabama. They ended up putting Tyler Buckner into that game out of nothing but desperation. Tyler Buckner, who's now going back to Notre Dame to play lacrosse, just a really quick random side note. But yeah, so Alabama had a little bit of a rough stretch in the regular season, but then you could see him slowly get the wheels turning. And in my eyes, that revolved around Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is playing his best football of the year right now. He's playing his best football of his career right now, and it's with his legs and with his arm. So the guy's got an arm. He's got an arm on him. He's a little bit – he reminds me a little bit of a more accurate version of Joe Milton. Obviously, Michigan fans watched a very inaccurate version of Joe Milton in 2020 for a couple games. Milroe, he's got a really strong arm. He has a pretty good deep ball. That's his strength in my eyes. And he can get out of the pocket and he can create off schedule, which is going to be really important against this Michigan defense in the secondary that's really good against the pass. So Alabama's playing its best football of the year right now. Michigan, on the other hand, obviously they haven't lost, so there's no real low point to the season, but they've shown weaknesses at times. And when they've shown weaknesses, we saw some rough spots against Maryland, which you can chalk that up to, oh, that's just a sleeper game before the game. But, I think there's some substance there. Michigan has struggled sometimes against the pass. This pass defense, like I said, is really good. But if there's a weakness on the Michigan defense, it is sometimes giving up those larger pass plays. You and I talked about this earlier. So I think Alabama's going to look to potentially attack Michigan vertically as opposed to trying to play power football, which I don't think will work against the Wolverines.
That makes sense. Am I crazy for being concerned about Jalen Milroe, Isaiah Bond, and Jermaine Burton matching up against Mikey St. Still, Will Johnson, Rod Moore, Quentin Johnson? Is that crazy or is that logical?
See, I don't think it's crazy. I don't think there's really a clear advantage there. I think Jermaine Burton's really, really good, and that's not a hot take. And so is Isaiah Bond. They're both really good talents. Will Johnson's obviously crazy talented as well. And Mikey Samra still is going to be a mid-round pick likely in this next NFL draft. He's only going to fall that far because he's a little undersized for the NFL. He's a All-American. The guy's been an absolute beast. He's developed from being a 3-star up to this point in his career. So he's had such an impressive season. He's an absolute ball hawk. He makes plays everywhere. So, there's talent on both sides, and this is kind of a cop-out, I guess, but I don't really know who to expect to come out on top. I think a lot of who wins that matchup between the Michigan secondary and the Alabama wideouts, a lot of that is going to fall actually on the Michigan defensive line and the Alabama front. Who's going to win that matchup? And is Milroe going to be sitting comfortably in the pocket back there looking downfield? In that case, maybe the wideouts, if you give Jermaine Burton 4 seconds, 5 seconds to get open, that's going to be tough. But if Milroe's running for his life with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and Jalen Harrell breathing down his neck, then it's going to be rough going for those wide receivers. So I think a lot of that falls actually on that front 7 matchup.
That's a good point. Before we get into looking at Alabama's defense against Michigan's offense, or rather Alabama's offense against Michigan's defense, pardon me, I want to check the chat really quick because there are people active, and by active I mean they're arguing about this game. A person states, if Michigan has to, or I don't know what that exactly means, but if Michigan has to, I wonder if they can do what they did against Penn State. What's your take on that? I have an interesting feel about that. What's your opinion regarding that?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what you think about this. I think the best case scenario for Michigan this game is this does play out like a Penn State-ish game. Now, I don't see it going down exactly like that because I have to believe Alabama's pass attack is a lot more competent than that of Penn State. And I know that for a fact. Jalen Milroe is better than Drew Aller. And these wideouts are miles better than Penn State's wideouts. They've also got Nick Saban as a coach, which doesn't hurt either. So I don't see it playing out exactly like that, but it could be like a Penn State heavy type of game. Penn State, but better, And just in the fact that I think if Michigan forces Jalen Milroe to be a pocket passer, I do think they're in a good position to win this ball game because I don't think Jalen Milroe is the type of passer quite yet in his career. Now he's got time to develop, but I don't think he's the type of passer quite yet where he's going to sit back there, read the defense, and pick you apart. Okay, that's not something I anticipate happening. So if Michigan can force Jalen Milroe to be a pocket passer, I think they're in a good position to win the game. And I guess that's a similarity between the Penn State game and potentially this game, but I don't see it playing out like that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are twofold. Number one, whenever the Big Ten is matched up with the SEC in the past, it doesn't go well. And typically the lines of scrimmage are owned by the SEC. So there's that. The history, the almost genetic point of view, if you will, because this has happened in the past, it will happen in the future. But then I look at what has happened this season, and Michigan, defensively, this is pretty incredible. Defensively, in every statistic, in scoring defense, in defense by quarter, Michigan's better than Alabama. In all statistics, it's 14, I believe. Yeah, 14 statistics compared to 1 in a total of 15. Michigan's better than Alabama in total defense. They're better in 5 out of 6 categories in rush defense, and they're better in 10 out of 11 in passing defense, and 4 out of 4 in special teams defense. I mean, Michigan has a decisive, when you just compare defense v defense, which isn't how the matchups work, but when you compare both sides of the ball, Michigan is that much better defensively, and a lot of that's at the line of scrimmage. And then you look at offensively, and this is where I was really going with that point. Michigan is proven in stopping the run. Alabama in rushing defense is outside of the top 25 in every category.
Yeah.
And Michigan runs the ball 60% of the time, which is something that we wrote down to look at. Michigan also has a quarterback with legs. So I think that Michigan it would be a higher scoring affair because Alabama's a better offense than Penn State, but I don't think they have the same defense that Penn State does either. So I think it could be a higher scoring edition of the Penn State game. There are other chats that people are getting to here. Someone said, this being Shivan Jethwa, I hope I pronounced that name properly, he said that you look like J.J. McCarthy. I assume that's a compliment. Someone else said, Royal Pain, one massive problem with those stats. Alabama's faced 6 of the top 25 offenses. Michigan has faced as many in the 100s, and the best team is in the 30s. What's your thought on that?
Sorry, could you repeat that real quick?
One massive problem with those statistics is that Alabama has faced 6 of the top 25 total offenses. Michigan, meanwhile, has faced as many, that being 6, that are in the hundreds, and the best in total offenses in the 30s. I don't think he's wrong there, because I think Ohio State is like Michigan, where their total offense is worse than their scoring offense, but I could be wrong. I'm going to check that while you answer.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts there is I'd take that with a grain of salt. And who you play does matter. But I think looking at statistics like that, that's only important if it's like a Don Brown situation. In a Don Brown situation, let me explain what I mean by that. Back like 2016 is a bad example. Like 2015, 2018, 2017, those years, Don Brown, his defenses would dominate every inferior team. But then as soon as you played an Ohio State, as soon as you played a great team in a bowl game with talent that was as good as Michigan's or better, you'd get cooked. So your overall defense ended up looking pretty good at the end of the year, top 5, but you'd get cooked by every good team you played. It's not the same anymore. So I think you have to respect what this Michigan team has done against good offenses. This Michigan team went up against a good Ohio State offense, and you can say whatever you want about that Ohio State offense. I think it's a great offense. They've got the best wide receiver in the country, Marvin Harrison Jr. Some would argue that, but I'm going to stick to my guns on that one. I think he's the best wideout that there is in college football. And held him to 24 points. So that's something to hang your hat on. Penn State, a really physical team. I know their offense isn't by any means great, but they can run the ball and they've got talent for sure. And they were completely shut down, utterly and completely shut down by this Wolverine team. So, yeah, I think Michigan, really the one great offense they've played this year, or even good offense they've played this year, Ohio State, they were successful. And I think because of that, that upholds the rest of the results throughout the year and proves that Michigan has been successful even outside of playing lesser competition.
Agreed. It's also important to consider that Ohio State's receiver core in total, with their wide receivers and tight ends outside. No, actually, because that'd be factoring in quarterback. Only looking at receivers, that's a better receiver core than anyone that Alabama has faced. Alabama just happened to play better quarterbacks in Jaden Daniels and Carson Beck. But yeah, that would be my rebuttal. You said it as best as anyone else. Looking for any other comments? There are some, but they're mainly arguing back and forth. A person said earlier about my concerns with Michigan secondary that I'm not crazy, just like what you said about how Alabama's passing offense is explosive. What do you think about Alabama's offense against Michigan's defense? We've established that Michigan is the favorite, and understandably so. So it sounds weird to say this, but what does Alabama's offense have to do against Michigan's defense to maximize their chances of winning?
Yeah, I think Alabama's is my face gets lit up by the Word document I just pulled up. Alabama's offense against Michigan's defense. Jalen Milroe. I wrote down is, can Jalen Milroe make magic? And that might be a little bit of a stretch, but I think Jalen Milroe is going to have to be a difference maker. If not magical, he's going to have to be a difference maker to some degree. And this is why. This Michigan run defense, it's no secret that they're really, really good. Michigan only gives up 3.0 yards a rush, three yards a rush flat. That's sixth in the country. Alabama only runs for 4 yards a rush. That's 83rd. So this matchup, running the ball for this Alabama offense, is going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough sledding against Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and all these guys that Michigan can throw out there. They play so many guys on that defensive front. Hardly anybody plays really a heavy load of snaps on this Michigan defense, especially in the front seven. So I think Milroe's going to have to make some plays on his own. Maybe drop one in the breadbasket here and there. Make an NFL level throw. Make some plays with his legs. I also think Milroe's going to, like I said, is going to have to make plays with his legs in order for the run game to be successful. If he starts to be able to pull that ball and get outside and beat some of these edges like Jalen Harrell and pick up 5 yards, that forces Michigan to be a little bit more conservative and allows maybe these Alabama backs to pick up some more yards on the ground traditionally. So I'm curious what your thoughts are there. I think Milroe's going to have to play a good game and to be a factor in the run game.
Before I talk more out of my own mouth and make my own statements, I want to ask an additional question. How much of Alabama have you watched this season?
Alabama this year, I've watched Texas. I watched the Texas game, obviously that being the game they lost. Other than that, I watched the SEC championship, watched the whole SEC championship game, in which Milroe, his completion percentage wasn't through the roof, if I'm remembering correctly, but he made big plays. And he made enough plays, and he made some really big plays and some really timely plays. And Alabama actually physically won that game, which I didn't think they would out physical Georgia in the line of scrimmage. So that's something, I'm talking about Michigan shutting down Alabama's run game. Maybe not if Alabama plays like how they did against Georgia. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at here, but I do think Alabama out physical Georgia. So those are really the two games I was locked in for Alabama. I also watched some Alabama Tennessee, that big second half from the Crimson Tide. I watched that Alabama Auburn game, which honestly I throw that out. That's a rivalry game. Crazy stuff happens. People are saying, "Oh, why are you scared of Alabama? They almost lost to Auburn." Michigan almost lost to Maryland. It happens. Really good teams sometimes have off games, and hey, Milroe put together some magic at the end, and they won that game. So that's what matters.
Absolutely.
I'm curious that's how much of Bama I've watched this year.
Yeah, I was only asking because I was curious specifically about your thoughts on the SEC championship game. Just brief thoughts, like what was a positive and a negative, I guess, that stuck out to you about Alabama.
I guess I'm going to try to remember a game that happened a while ago now. But like I said, Milrow made some timely plays. He made that throw, I believe, to Burton over the middle of the end zone. Was that Burton who caught that touchdown
Yes,
to go
for the
up 10?
touchdown. Yeah.
Yeah, so that throw to go up 17-7 was big. I think if I remember correctly, Milrow was climbing the pocket there. He was under some pressure. I think he climbed the pocket and made that throw up high to Burton, who went and got it. So that was a big play, kind of off schedule a little bit for Milrow. I'm trying to remember. Help me out here. Did Milrow make an impact with his legs that game, or not so much?
He did when he did the fake toss and ran for a first down to win the game and some other
Okay.
moments, but he was also sacked 4 times by a Georgia defense that has less than 30 sacks in 13 games. I guess that. Do you have anything else to add before I go on?
I mean, I'll let you take I do have an opinion on the sack numbers. You can take it from there and say give us your take.
Okay. Georgia's defense has not been the same this season. And a point that a chat referenced that I'm just going to pull up here is Michigan, in the same way that Alabama has played elite offenses, Michigan has played 3 elite defenses that are probably better than the best defense that Alabama's offense has played in Penn State, Ohio State, and Iowa. Georgia has not been able to get pressure on anyone. They don't have an alien or a unicorn on the D line, nor at linebacker. Their best players are in the secondary. I guess that would have been my negative from the SEC title game, is Alabama out physical Georgia, but it looked like both teams' physicality was questionable, but Alabama's just happened to be better. The positive I would take away is more so from Alabama's defense limiting a Georgia offensive line that was playing like the best in the country and then making them look pitiful.
Yeah, that was really impressive because Georgia, frankly, here I'm going to pull up this because I'm curious now that we're talking about it. I'm going to pull up the stats from that game. If I remember correctly, Georgia could not run the football.
No, they couldn't, but neither could Alabama. They ran for less than 3 yards per carry as well.
That's fair. I think, and honestly, though, that comes as less of a surprise because Alabama, frankly, I just don't think is a great rushing team.
No.
If I'm honest with myself here, I really don't. I don't expect. I'm going to go out on a limb. I don't even think I'm out on a limb, but I'm going to stick my neck out here, and I'm on the record saying this. I don't think Alabama's going to be able to run the ball at all versus Michigan.
No.
The SEC is more physical. Alabama's going to dominate the line of scrimmage. Forget about it.
Yeah.
On the offensive line, at least. Now, Alabama's D-line against Michigan's O-line, that's a different story. We'll talk about that later. But the whole narrative that Alabama's O-line is going to come out and just impose itself because the SEC is so much more physical than everybody else, forget about it. Bury that. If you're betting money on the game, do yourself a favor and don't buy into that. Alabama could win this game, but they're not going to win it because their offensive line just bodies Michigan. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, they'll win it. If they do, it's because their defense, and it will be because their quarterback. I mean, Georgia and TCU had better rushing attacks than this Alabama team. Yeah. Now, granted, Michigan over the past 2 seasons also had a better rushing offense than this Michigan team. But Michigan, we'll get into the offense later, but they're still very efficient in short and intermediate running. I think Alabama's offense, to go back to the earlier point, although we were still pretty much on track there, I think in order for them to win, they have to establish some kind of presence on the ground. And I think they have to be consistent. They have to they have to use as many plays as possible, which is uncharacteristic of them, but they have to have many plays and they have to control some time. Because if they score quickly, or if they get 3 and outs, then Michigan can control the clock, and they can dictate the tempo of the game. And Michigan will be more than willing to go for it on 4th down. They'll be more than willing to run and even punt the ball back as long as it means there's an extra few seconds melted off. I mean, they'll do anything to control the clock. That's why they run it for 60% of the time, and that's why they use almost 35 seconds per play. It's ridiculous. I think that's what Alabama's offense has to do. And for Michigan's defense, what you have to do is you have to force them into 3 and out. And when you do let up scores, maybe this isn't advisable, but let your defense falter where it's faltered all season. Don't let them score on a physical drive. If you're going to let them score, let Jermaine Burton get like wide open one time, because then you can control the clock, and it's not you cannot sustainably, with Milroe and that wide receiver core, throw like 4 deep touchdowns on a defense like this with their secondary.
I agree. I completely agree with you. I think that's a good, and that's a point I think that as a fan watching the game, it's so hard to appreciate that because, like, listen, for transparency, I've said this before. I think when I'm on the show, I'm a Michigan fan, and everybody knows you're a Michigan fan as well. So I've got some bias here, but when I'm watching this game, I'm probably going to be having a heart attack. I'm going to be pretty nervous. And if Alabama throws a 75-yard touchdown to Jermaine Burton, I'm probably going to act like the world's ending. Odds are.
Yes.
But in reality, although that's a win for Alabama, obviously a 75-yard touchdown is a win for the offense. Like you said, that's not sustainable and it's not repeatable. And the question is whether Alabama will be able to drive the ball up and down the field on Michigan. And frankly, the other way around. Will Michigan be able to drive the ball up and down the field on this really good Alabama secondary? But yeah, I think that's.
No, that's very good.
I think I think a lot of this comes down to, again, and it's a cliche, but a lot of it comes down to the line of scrimmage. I don't think there's quite as much pressure on the Alabama offensive line as there is on the Michigan offensive line. In other words, I think Alabama is more likely to win the game without their offensive line playing great than Michigan's is.
Completely, because their quarterback's more mobile, and they, again, against Georgia, they get sacked 4 times. Alabama's O-line's improved, but they're too young at the position to be elite this season. They were never going to be elite in the trenches the way they started out the season.
Yeah.
And they've been able to scheme around that and adapt. They've found ways to hide the weaknesses and to hide the wrinkles. Michigan has only been without Zach Zinner for like 1 whole game. And McCarthy doesn't have the same athletic ability, and frankly, he doesn't have the same big play capability. He doesn't. No. And Michigan, outside of Penn State, hasn't faced an elite pass rush. Like, Penn State is the best pass rush defense in the country. Alabama's is up there as well. And Michigan had to go full turtle mode. And they had to run the ball and chew clock and be extremely conservative. So we'll see if that works. I'm going to check the chat again because Chimichanga Guy, who's sponsored this channel before via Patreon, is here. Howdy do, Sam. Go Blue. Chimichanga Guy's an Ohio State fan, but he's pulling for us to win it all on the basis of supporting the Big Ten. Someone else.
Love to see it.
Yeah, I love to see it too, because I'm hoping Ohio State wins the Cotton Bowl. We'll get into that later in the show. A person comes down to defensive line. If Milroe was 2 seconds in the pocket, his main strength, the deep ball outside of his legs, is taken away. Do you agree with that?
That's true. That's a good point. If he doesn't have, and again, I think it depends on what type of pressure Michigan's getting. If Michigan gets pressure off the edge, then I think Milroe still has a fighting chance because, like we've talked about, he's so good with his legs, he can escape and prolong plays. If the pocket is collapsing on him like this and he's getting pancaked, you've got nowhere to go. And I don't think he's the type of guy who's going to make heroic throws in a collapsing pocket.
No.
So I think if Michigan's getting pressure via the interior defensive line, then I think Milroe might be cooked. If Michigan's getting pressure via the edges, then I think he's still got a fighting shot. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Oh, I agree with that. It's more likely than not Michigan gets pressure on the edges because they have Seth McLaughlin at center and they have more experience at center. Tackle, especially early in the season, particularly with Caden Proctor, that's where their weakness is. So Michigan will probably get pressure on the edge, but probably some on the interior too with Mason Graham and Chris Jenkins. This is a really good comment, and this is going to help us segue into talking about Michigan's offense against Alabama's defense. Wolvergeek says, when you ask me, the very key and crucial parts of Michigan winning this game is coming down to the use of play action, turnovers, no mistakes, and trench play. I think that play action is going to be important here. And I say that because Alabama's secondary, again going back to talking points about Alabama's defense, their secondary isn't as good as Iowa's when it's healthy, and it's certainly not as good as Ohio State's. It's probably like Penn State's, where Penn State's this season had a great near-elite secondary, but they weren't invincible. Ohio State's secondary is practically invincible.
Oh, it's crazy.
It's I mean, they zero blitz and only have 3 guys in coverage, and you can't pass on them. That's how good their secondary is. Georgia's is probably the same level, although not as good. Just my own opinion. What do you think? How do you picture the battle between Michigan's offense and Alabama's defense, and what do Sharon Moore and Kevin Steele need to do on their sides of the ball to maximize the Crimson Tide or the Wolverines' chances of winning?
Yeah, so far as the Michigan offense goes against facing off against Alabama's secondary, I do think the advantage goes to the Crimson Tide. I don't think Michigan has an elite wide receiver core, although I do think they have a good wide receiver core. I think Roman Wilson's a good wide receiver. I don't know if he's elite. The same with Cornelius Johnson. I think he's a very serviceable, solid college wide receiver who, frankly, has come up with huge plays left and right. I mean, that conversion on 3rd down and 3 against Ohio State this last year, that may have won Michigan the game in hindsight. I mean, I don't even have to talk about what he did the year before against Ohio State. And he made a big play in 2021 too. He had that catch down at the 1. That was him, right? From McNamara.
That was him.
So I mean, the guy's made big plays. So he's obviously comes through in big moments, but I don't think he's the most talented guy on the field. Alabama, I think, has more talent at wide receiver. But frankly, the Michigan secondary, I think, is a little bit better than Alabama's secondary. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I think the matchup is really even both ways, but I think there's more talent. How do I say this? You see what I'm getting at. There's more talent on Michigan's secondary, and there's also more talent at wide receiver for Alabama than there is the other way around for both squads, really.
No, I agree with that completely. Yeah, the more intriguing matchup is Alabama's offense versus Michigan's defense. That's the more intriguing matchup because those are the more explosive sides of the ball for both teams. Michigan's offense is boring but very efficient, and Alabama's defense is efficient, and they have NFL talent and potential unicorns in one moment, and then the next moment they're not a top 25 defense. And they're wildly... I haven't watched as much Alabama as I've had Michigan, and I am going to watch more Alabama before making my official prediction. But I completely agree with you. I don't think Alabama's secondary is as talented as Michigan's. Now, what I will say is Michigan hasn't played many secondaries that are great at taking away the football. I don't know if Alabama's secondary is elite at taking away the football, but 12 interceptions, 6 fumble recoveries, that's good enough. They force over a turnover per game, and 12 interceptions is pretty good. I mean, like Ohio State's turnover margin, for example, this season, I saw a comment that mentioned this from Nathaniel Laffey, longtime subscriber of the channel. He said, wish Ohio State's defensive backs could come up with some picks. Ohio State's defense is good at forcing turnovers, but not as good as Michigan, and their offense coughs up the ball. So they have basically 0 turnover margin. Michigan's turnover margin is
crazy. It's so good.
Yeah. Only Penn State's better. And that's because they don't throw picks, but they also don't complete passes.
That's because they don't throw the ball at the wide receivers or the DBs.
Exactly. It's all overthrows, underthrows.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can actually talk about them in the Peach Bowl. We're going to, if you want to talk about their coordinator hires too. My key for Michigan's offense is turtling that bad of a strategy? What do you think?
See, in my opinion, it is. And this is why. Against Penn State, that was your game to lose. Michigan was the better team coming in. Everybody knew it. The only real question was, okay, is Connor Stalions, is the lack of him going to matter? And the answer was no, by the way. And is the lack of Jim Harbaugh going to matter? And the answer also was no. So turtling was a fine strategy there because, like we said, Penn State doesn't throw the ball anywhere near anybody. And because of that, it was easy enough for Michigan to just kind of bury their heads in the sand on offense, and on defense figure that you can make plays, and Penn State's not going to move the ball consistently. I don't think it's the same against Alabama. I think Alabama is better than Penn State significantly on the offensive side of the ball. I don't think that's a hot take at all. I think that's pretty obvious. Jalen Milroe's a good quarterback. He's the best quarterback Michigan will have played this year. I think Alabama has some great wide receivers. Probably the second best wide receiver core Michigan will face this year. And so I think turtling on offense, you're at risk. You're at the risk, like we talked about earlier, of one blown coverage, one Jermaine Burton 70-yard touchdown, and then all of a sudden you're playing from behind. And as a Michigan fan, you're going, here we go again on New Year's Day. Well, last year it was New Year's Eve, but New Year's Day, and we're losing the biggest football game of the season. So I feel like you've got to come out and not necessarily – you don't have to throw the kitchen sink at Bama if you're Michigan. I'm not saying you start running double reverse hook and ladders. I'm saying you run your regular offense, but you're going to have to do a little bit more than run. It can't be that same game plan that it was against Penn State. That's my take on it.
Yeah. I agree that it can't be the exact same, but I want to push back on that because this is so weird because the way they shut down Georgia's run game is scary because if Georgia's offensive line is Joe Moore Award caliber and Alabama did that to them and it wasn't a fluke, that's scary.
Yeah.
Because that means they can control anyone, like even Oregon, even Washington, at the line of scrimmage. But defensively, against the run, they're not top 25 in opponent yards per carry. And Michigan against Penn State tried some play action. It was rare, but maybe you try a little more of that. And Michigan against Ohio State, and on the season, they're 15 of 19 on fourth down. So why... Maybe it's ill-advised, but if you can run, convert fourth down, run, and just and beat this defense down even for a drive or two, maybe I'm wrong with the fact that this offensive line isn't as good as in years previous. But I mean, what do you think? I look here, and even though I think it's a Nick Saban team, and I don't think they're just going to lay down and die, Jalen Milroe struggles to hit short and intermediate passes, bring pressure. They're not as good at Penn State in running the football. They also don't have Penn State's defense. Penn State is a ridiculous defense. Why not? I mean, am I wrong there, or is there like a lot of substance to that?
No, I don't think you're wrong. What I was getting at mostly is I'm not against coming out and trying to physically dominate the game, because if you can figure out on that first offensive drive, if you're Michigan or really if you're Alabama as well, if either of these teams can figure out, okay, we can run the ball for 4.5 a carry on these guys, I think the game might be over right then. In effect, even though it might be a close game, I think if Michigan or Alabama comes out and goes after that first drive, okay, we can run the ball up the gut for 4.5. I think the other squad's in big trouble. So I'm not against being physical on that on a couple of drives, or really the whole game. And again, that's what Michigan does. They run the ball 60% of the time. They dominate the clock. They get their defense off the field. What I'm saying is, if it gets to 3rd and 6, if it gets to 3rd and 5 even, or even 3rd and 4, sometimes you're going to have to let J.J. McCarthy drop back and say, this is our 5-star quarterback. This is our prize guy on offense. Let's see if he can win us a national championship. I know this isn't the national championship game, but advance us to the national championship. So there's going to be times when you're going to have to hand him the reins to the offense and trust him to make a play. I just think you can't coach scared, because in my eyes, Sharon Moore in that Penn State game coached a little bit scared, and that's fine. Call it scared. Call it, I take that back. Scared, I don't think is the right word. I think he understood where that game was and understood that Michigan could play conservatively. So I take that back. I don't think he coached scared, but I don't think you can be that conservative. So I don't necessarily agree with you about, or disagree about running the ball.
Yeah, and if they played aggressively against Penn State, I don't think we would have lost, but it wouldn't have been the same controlling game, because Chop Robinson was just killing Carson Barnhart, and that's the other thing too. Like, if Dallas Turner is going to be in J.J. McCarthy's face in 2.5 seconds, what would be? I don't know. I'd rather be in a 4th and 2, and Alabama knows I'm going to run it, but there's a chance that Corum can power forward, than be in 4th and 10 or 4th and 7, or but it's so difficult. That's the key for Alabama's defense, is can you get pressure, and can you get pressure on nearly every passing down with Michigan's weakness at tackle. But if Michigan is able to run the football for over 4 yards per carry, and they want to run it all the time, well, I think that's game over, because I don't think that Alabama they don't have an Oregon, Washington, Georgia offense. But that's the scary thing about Washington. Or I don't know about Texas. Well, no, also Texas, because you're not going to turtle against Texas and run for 4 yards per carry on 60 attempts. Not with Sweat. That's impossible.
No, you're not.
That's the scary thing about those teams, is I don't think Michigan could play their traditional way that they've played at times this year and beat Washington or beat Texas. But they also have weaker secondaries. They don't have Nick Saban at head coach, etc. What's your prediction for this matchup?
All right, prediction time. I've been settled on this for a while. I'm going to go Michigan, and here's why. I think Michigan wins in a couple of really key statistical categories. You already mentioned the turnover margin. Michigan is plus 1.3 turnover margin per game. That is absurd. Like you said, it's second in the country. Only Penn State's better. Alabama's turnover margin is plus 0.6. So that's good, but it's not the astronomical number Michigan's is. So Michigan's better there. I'm going to look at penalty yards next. Michigan commits 26.3 penalty yards per game. That's first in the country. That is ridiculous. It's such a disciplined team. Alabama, on the other hand, commits 51.3. Now, that's not horrendous, but,
Look at
that's 25
Washington's.
yards. Yeah, exactly. It's 25 yards, and that matters. That matters in a game like this. So because of numbers like that, and because, frankly, I haven't seen Michigan lose, so I don't know there's anybody in the country that can beat Michigan, whereas I have seen Alabama lose. And that sounds like a cavemanish argument, but it matters. I've seen a football team go out there and beat Alabama. I haven't seen a football team go out there and beat Michigan for 4 quarters. I just haven't seen it. So because of that, I'm going to go Michigan 27-24. I think it's really close. I think it's very similar to the Ohio State game. And I think the deciding factor is that Michigan can run the ball a little bit better than Alabama can. I don't think they're going to dominate running the ball, but I think Michigan runs the ball with a couple of clutch Blake Corum 4th down conversions per the usual Michigan experience. I think Michigan runs the ball just well enough to squeak out a win by 3.
Thank you for the explanation and for the prediction. Yeah, you think it's going to be a close game. 27-24. That's crazy. I will say this. I don't know if I'm going to give a prediction here or not, but I'll have to decide in the next few minutes. I do think Alabama is going to be kicking more field goals than Michigan. Reichard is a better kicker than Turner, and I think Michigan is more efficient at scoring touchdowns than Alabama is in the red zone. Alabama makes up for that by scoring on explosive touchdown drives that Michigan could only dream of doing. By the way, Washington, in penalties, is outside of the top 125 in penalty yards per game and total penalties per game.
Yep.
So that is something to look out for. Prediction time. I really want to watch. I'm going to restrain myself.
Okay.
I want to watch more film, and I want to take an even deeper dive into this before I make a official pick, but I will say that I'm leaning Michigan for the same reason that I've leaned Michigan all season. In fact, Michigan has a greater statistical advantage over Alabama than they did over Ohio State.
Wow.
Yes. And I will say that I think Ohio State is better than Alabama. That's a genuine opinion of mine. Now, I don't know if Ohio State is more suited to win a national title due to their inconsistency at quarterback, like keeping Kyle McCord as a constant, but they have the better run game, they have the better receivers, and their defense is... The only thing Alabama's better at defensively is pass rush.
Yeah.
That's it. Ohio State is the better DBs, they have the better run-stopping linebackers, and they have the much better defensive tackles. And traditional defensive ends. Alabama just has edge players. They have hybrids that are really good. Dallas Turner, linebacker, DE, hybrid. Someone said both of us are picking Michigan, not a surprise. It's funny. Let me see who else. Ohio State isn't better than Alabama. The offense hasn't gelled. Okay, I get that. I want to hear your thoughts on this. I guess from here we can segue into the... You think we can segue into the other bowl games?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, let's do it then. Yes, Alabama's offense has better chemistry. But they have so much less... They have so much less to work with. Like, their O-line... inferior. Their tight ends, inferior. Their wide receiver core, inferior. The only thing Alabama is better at than Ohio State, and I said this in my video earlier today, is QB. That's it. Their supporting cast, and I think their supporting cast makes up for that. It looks like you're disagreeing.
Well, no, you're right. See, the thing is, you're right on... Just thinking about it, I think you're right, but man, Alabama has just won when it mattered, and they've just gotten better and better throughout the years. So I really, now that you're saying that, I don't know if these two teams played on a neutral field, I'm taking Alabama, but I'm also not really sure how I back that up logically. But my gut is telling me I'm pretty confidently taking Alabama on a neutral field.
You could back it up logically. It's Nick Saban, but that's the only
Right.
point you could use. You couldn't
Yeah.
know because Ohio State has played a tougher strength of schedule than Michigan
Yeah.
has as well, like more comparable to Alabama's.
Yeah.
So you could pick it on the basis that Alabama's staff has done a better job of maximizing their talent. I think that Nick Saban has carried this team. I think if you gave this Alabama team to 95+% of college football staffs, they would go 9-3. They would get destroyed by someone. They would be someone's sacrificial lamb. I don't like Alabama statistically. It's part of what annoys me and also scares me about them is they're so inept for a traditional top 4 team and yet they have the best coach. And the last thing I would want my team to do is lose to a team that is statistically inferior but could totally be the better team in when it matters because statistics don't tell the whole story because they're an average of every game. They don't always
Yeah.
tell you how much a team is improved from game 1 to game X, in this case game 14 for both teams.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Man, that would be an interesting matchup. Bama Ohio State would be a really interesting matchup. I'm interested about that now that we're talking. Now that we're talking about that.
Um Now, what's funny about this is I think Georgia would match up very well against Ohio State because Ohio State's willing to give up rushing yards, and Georgia would just take every bit of that. And Ohio
Yeah.
State struggles to run consistently, except on the perimeter, and Georgia has good perimeter play and good tackling DBs. That would be an
Yeah.
intriguing rematch, but we got that in the Orange Bowl between Florida State and Georgia. Let's briefly discuss Washington, Texas. I will tell you that I have no clue who I'm picking. This is to me a 50-50 game where coaching and analytics, not actually, no, coaching and matchups I think favor Washington. Analytics and recruiting talent and depth favor Texas.
Yeah. I My take here, unless there's something else you wanted to say.
No, go ahead.
My take here, I think the interesting part of this game is Washington's offense against Texas's defense, and I am excited for this game, man. So my first question is, can Dylan Johnson run the ball effectively? And can this whole Washington offensive line block this Texas defense? I think if Dylan Johnson runs the ball for even 4 yards a carry, I think you're in trouble. Texas is in big trouble. Now, Texas only gives up 2.9 yards a carry. That's fifth nationally. That's even better than Michigan, who ranks just behind them at sixth, giving up 3.0 yards a carry. So, I will Washington be able to run the ball? I'm not sure. It's going to be tough. They did run the ball against a good Oregon defensive front, but boy, does Texas, you said, with Sweat and those boys up front, they are really tough to run the ball on. The problem for Texas comes, and I'm going to get to I'm picking Washington in this game. I'll be upfront about that. I don't have a score prediction, but I am taking Washington, and here's why. Texas gives up nearly 60% completion percentage, which is 51st in the country. They give up 6.7 yards per pass, and they give up 240.8 pass yards a game. Those pass yards a game, that's 87th pass defense in the country. Washington completes 65% completion percentage. They get 9.2 yards a pass. That's ninth in the country. And they pass for 343 yards a game. That's first. So I think I think Texas is really good on the D line, but I'm not sure it's going to matter, man. This Washington offense is explosive. Rome Odunze, by the way, what a name. All name team. Rome Odunze is a beast. Jalen Polk is a beast. McMillan is a beast. Michael Penix, he doesn't get sacked a lot. They only takes a sack on 2.22% of his snaps. So I think, yeah, this Texas D line is elite, but I'm not sure it's going to matter. I think Washington's going to drop back and say, okay, you got a good D line. Congratulations. They're not going to have anybody to tackle because we're going to throw the ball 65% of the time, 65, maybe even higher percent of the time, and just cook the secondary of yours. So I think
Yeah.
Texas is offense is going to have to really put up some points if they want to win this game.
Yeah. And the problem with Texas is their sack percentage is worse than Michigan's and Alabama's by quite a mile.
Yep.
Like, they're very good at shutting down the run. They don't have ends. They don't have edge players. They don't have secondary players. Well, of course they do. This is me. That's explaining jokes automatically makes me lame, but I don't care. It's me basically saying they don't match up well with an offensive line that, like you said, is that elite at pass pro. Yeah, I guess my issue is this is difficult. Texas, by virtue of their talent, it's so weird. Like, I think Washington has the higher ceiling. I think Washington's been the better team for much of the season. But Texas, with their talent, probably has a higher, I don't know if this makes sense, mean average performance. Like, we've seen Texas own people. Alabama, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
We have not seen Washington punk someone for 4 quarters or close out
That's
a game
fair.
and win by 10. We've seen Texas do that time and time again. We've also seen them nearly choke games. We've seen them... I think if it's a close game, Washington has it in the bag. But I also think there's a chance that Washington has been dodging Satan for 13 games, and Texas could be Satan and just beat them with a sock full of rocks.
That's yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, looking at the chat, let's see what's going on here. This is a better opponent for Michigan in one big way, writes Wolvergeek. It makes sure that the TCU game doesn't play out again. Because if we had Florida State, there would be a chance we overlook them. I agree with that.
Yeah, that's possible. That being said, I'd much rather play Florida State, to be honest.
From an analytical point, yeah. From an overall point, I'd still rather play Alabama, because then if we beat them, we beat a real opponent, and no one can blow it away. Also, if we beat Alabama, then I'm pretty sure that we can beat Texas. I know that doesn't necessarily make sense due to the transitive property, but I think that Texas and Alabama, because of the injury to Jonathan Brooks, are now similar in a certain way in overall performance. I think it's Washington. Washington is the team I think to be scared about. And not to get ahead of ourselves too much, but I don't know if I could pick Michigan without some bias. I don't know if I could pick Michigan to beat Washington from what I have seen. What do you think about that?
See, I've thought about this, and I think every possible matchup in this playoff is going to be close. It's going to be, I don't see there being blowouts anywhere, really. I think the most likely blowout is a possibility of Texas or Washington blowing each other out, because I think those teams have been a little inconsistent at times. Like we said, Texas has been more consistent, I'd say. Well, I don't know. Texas, like you said, has had a higher ceiling than Washington, but at the same time, they've had a little bit of inconsistency. And Washington has played close with some teams that they have no business playing close with. So I do think if Washington rolls out there and plays a bad game, or Texas rolls out there and does a Texas classic moment and chokes away the season and does idiotic stuff for 4 quarters, we could possibly see a 17-point game, a 14-point game. But I highly doubt that.
Yeah.
I really highly doubt that. And frankly, in the Michigan and Alabama game, I think those teams are so well coached that there's almost no way this game is a blowout. I think we're in for 3 really good football games when this thing is all said and done. And sorry, I almost forgot the question. Michigan, Washington. Michigan, Washington. I'm taking Michigan because I'm so confident in this Michigan secondary. And I do think Michigan has enough pass rush to get after Michael Penix, even though he doesn't take a lot of sacks. I'm taking Michigan in a more high scoring game. Ah, man, but it's tough. No, you're right. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's tough.
They
I
match
guess I
up
won't make
perfectly with us.
Yeah, I guess I won't make a prediction yet because there would be a lot of pressure on JJ McCarthy to make some plays because Michael Penix is across from you and he's going to make plays. We know
Yes.
Michael Penix is going to make plays. Even if Michigan plays a great defensive game, Michael Penix is going to put up 28 points. So JJ McCarthy is going to have to, yeah, man, yeah, that would be interesting. I'd have to think about that more actually.
Yeah, Quinn Ewers is the worst quarterback in the playoff. So I think even though Texas matches up well with Michigan, they don't have the game breaker at quarterback, and they don't have the same
Yeah,
receiver core. They don't have the same offense. They have a similar defense, a defense that's better at the D line, but somehow worse than Washington at secondary. And I think that Washington actually has a higher ceiling than Texas. I don't know if it was a confusing thing I said was the average mean performance of Texas is better than Washington's.
okay.
That's me saying that Texas on average plays a better game than Washington does, but
Yeah,
Washington I
okay.
think has the higher ceiling. Like if Washington played their perfect game and Texas played their perfect game, I think Washington wins more like 6, 7, 8 times out of 10. Because I think Washington playing their perfect game might be the best team in the country. But
Wow.
I don't think they have the consistent like because talent and recruiting matters. I don't think they have the consistent blue chip ratio to play their best game to play at their best every game. Alabama can, Georgia can, Ohio State can. Even the Michigans of the world with their top 15 recruiting classes can play to their ceiling and be developed to have that stamina.
Yeah.
With Washington, it's weird. But that's the thing with Washington too. You put them in a close game and they find these ways to win.
Yep. Exactly.
I would probably lean Michigan if I was fully 50-50 split just because of my preseason prediction. But logically, if there was a way to pick a tie, it would be tempting to pick a tie. I mean, that's a
Yeah. It's oh man. Yeah, that's an intriguing matchup. That's a whole nother show just talking about that or what about Alabama? I mean, I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole, but what about Alabama Washington or Alabama Texas again? I mean, wow, these are a lot. There's a lot of really good matchups in this playoff.
Alabama Texas again could be disastrous for Texas because they don't have Jonathan Brooks, so they're not
That's
going to be the
true.
same team running. And
That's
Alabama's
true.
better. They're not as turnover prone.
You're right.
It's a game that and I don't see Nick Saban losing twice to anyone unless it's a
Yeah.
generationally talented team. Alabama Washington. Okay, that is I think that would be a shootout
Yeah. Yeah.
because deep pass against a secondary that's vulnerable to deep passes, but then Washington would totally be able to run on Alabama and also pass on Alabama. That
Yeah.
would be that game would be like I think that game would be like TCU Michigan from last year where Washington probably gets up early and then Alabama being the second half team that they are begins to storm back and that could be anyone's game in the fourth quarter. Yeah, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole either, but that's interesting. I just think Washington matches up very well with Michigan. I also think Kalen DeBoer and his staff are some of the best in the country. I
Oh, for
think
sure.
Texas, I think the reason Texas won't win it all is they have the worst staff and the worst quarterback out of all four teams. They could be better anywhere else. I don't care. They have the fourth best quarterback in the 4-team playoff. Sarkisian is not as good as Saban, not as good as Harbaugh, not as good as DeBoer.
Yeah.
And staff and quarterback, I mean, that's like literally half of your team.
Yeah.
And they're not.
And I don't think Quinn Ewers is bad. I
No, I
think
don't
Quinn Ewers
either.
is a great quarterback. Um, I'm excited to see him next year. Although I'm scared for Michigan to play him in week 2.
Yeah, I think we're beating Texas next year. I'm more sure of that than the fact of us winning the national title. It's going to be tough for them to travel up.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Tough.
That's true.
But, okay. Let's check the chat again and then get on to the Cotton Bowl and the Peach Bowl. Okay. Dank climbs. It'll be Bama, Texas for the national title. And he also says that Harbaugh will be in San Diego watching the game. So he's saying that Harbaugh will be hired away.
Doubt it. It's possible, but again, this has been going on for yeah. We'll see. We'll see.
Moose 13-0 3-peat says that Texas has played better defenses and Pac-12 defenses are terrible. He also Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, you finish. You finish.
He also said that he would rather play Florida State, and he also says the Rose Bowl is the national championship.
I don't know, man. I think Oregon's got a good defense, and Washington put up 34 on them.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
It
I think, like I said, yes, some of those teams have bad defenses. I mean, so does Michigan State. Michigan State has a horrible defense. Does that mean Michigan's offense just sucks? No, because we put up points on good defenses too. So that's what you prove yourself in those big games. And Washington proved themselves twice. They doubled down against Oregon. So I don't know. I feel like Washington's offense is as legit as really any offense I can ever remember watching in college football.
Yeah. When they play at their best, that's a lethal offense. Now the problem, of course, is we've seen their offense fall flat on their face on the sidewalk and have face pizza, like against Washington State and Arizona State. It's just total disasters. But they still won those games. I think I could see anyone win it all, but I think on virtue of coaching, and I love to talk about coaching staffs, I feel like it's Michigan with the best chance to win it all, just based off of analytics and also matchups. No, more so analytics, because I think that Alabama probably matches up better with the Sugar Bowl teams than Michigan does on virtue of their explosive passing game, at least offensively versus their defenses. And then I think Alabama and Washington would be about tied in chances. I think Texas has the worst chance. But maybe I'm wrong. I need to watch more film, which is something I'm going to do this week on all these teams. And then I'll have official prediction videos. Which, by the way, before anyone forgets, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, a comment in the chat what you're thinking. Because next week I'm going to be going live like I always do, but there will be official preview and prediction videos with yardage, scores. I might even go more in depth and try and really go down the rabbit hole because these games are fun. Before we end it off, what do you think about Penn State, Ole Miss, and also Ohio State, Missouri in the Peach Bowl and Cotton Bowl, respectively?
Yeah, we talked about Ohio State, Missouri, and it's interesting because, like you said, Ohio State doesn't have any opt-outs. No, they had, was it Mayan Williams?
Yeah, but he's injured.
Yeah. So Ohio State has no opt-outs, essentially. But they have lost some to the portal. So it's a little deceiving to say they have no opt-outs because they did lose McCord. Say whatever you want about Kyle McCord. I think Kyle McCord's a good quarterback. Is he great? No. Is he a star? No. But he was the second best quarterback in the Big Ten this year, in my opinion. He's less mistake prone than Tulia, so I'm going to give him the nod over Tulia as a college quarterback. I think McCord is a solid quarterback. And so losing him, having to start Devin Brown likely, and losing Chip Trainum is going to matter. That being said, I'm gonna go Ohio State just based on talent. As a Michigan fan, I fun to see Ohio State lose, but it would also be really hilarious to see an SEC team get walloped by a Big Ten team, especially if Michigan were to beat Bama as well, because the SEC crowd is so convinced right now that they're so much better than every other conference, and that Alabama and Georgia are both probably the best teams of all time to ever exist, and Alabama's going to beat Michigan by 30. So seeing an SEC team lose would be satisfactory. What about you?
I, since I'm not doing early previews for those games, or maybe no, I'm probably not going to because those aren't the main focused games, or maybe I could. Who knows? I'm leaning Ohio State, and I'm leaning Penn State. I think that Ohio State, Missouri is a hilarious conundrum of mismatches
Yeah.
based off of talent, based off of receiver play, based off of defensive play. I mean, if Ohio State isn't suffering any opt-outs outside of their outgoing transfers, then part of me doesn't understand how Missouri isn't favored unless Vegas is baiting people into picking Missouri so that everyone will think they win and then they get a bunch of money. But I could be wrong there. On the front of Penn State, I think that's a situation of mismatches. I think this is a season where I think the top 3 Big Ten teams are better than the top 3 SEC teams. Now, I think the SEC, once you get outside of the top 3, is deeper than the Big Ten. I think that probably the 6th or 7th best SEC team would beat the 4th best Big Ten team, that being Maryland. But I think that both Ohio State and Michigan are better, both, than Georgia, Alabama. And I think that this is interesting. Penn State in football power is ranked ahead of Alabama and ahead of Georgia. Which is hysterical. But I can see it making sense if Michigan wins it all and Ohio State owns in their bowl game. I could make sense of that. But a lot would have to happen.
Yeah, imagine a world where Penn State is better than Alabama and Georgia.
Doesn't make any sense.
Is it? It doesn't compute.
Okay, let's see.
Did you have a prediction there? Penn State, Ole Miss?
Penn State, and then
State?
Ohio State. Penn State over Ole Miss, Ohio State over Missouri. The playoff games, I just want to do as much research as possible because those matter the most. And to me, it makes sense outside of Ole Miss, Penn State, that the college football playoff games will be closer than the Cotton Bowl. I think as long as no one else opt-outs or transfers for Ohio State, that's important. That could be an ugly game because give Ryan Day all the crap that you want. I don't get why he's viewed the way he is by some. He's a good coach, and they are going to want to get momentum heading into a year that I think will make or break the program. And I said that in the preseason too. I said that Day can afford to lose this year because it's in Michigan. And from the perspective of if Michigan wins it all and you go 12-1, is that loss really that bad? That's like Nick Saban in 2019 losing to LSU and they go 15-0. Like, yes, it's disappointing, but you can't, like, if you just didn't play that game or something else went the other way, you're where that 15-0 team is. Like, you're that close. But I don't know. At some point, Day does have to beat Michigan, and I think it's next year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's just really quick. I don't think if Michigan wins the national championship, I think it's only a bad loss because it's Michigan. Like, let's say let's say Ohio State were to lose. Let's say Ohio State were to lose to a 15-0 Iowa national champion. That's completely impossible. But let's just say that were to happen. Okay, Ohio State fans wouldn't. I mean, they would care, but they wouldn't be up in arms like they are right now. It'd be like, oh, we lost to the national champion. We're really good. We're right there. But you do it to Michigan, and it's like, how many losses against Michigan can we take? That being said, I think Ryan Day is a top 5 coach in the country. I think he's ridiculously good coach. Top 5, I'd have to think about that. I think that's close. But anyways, he's in the upper echelon of coaches in college football.
He's close. He'll be in my top 8 next year for sure.
Yeah.
And the only reason I'd move him down is because other coaches that were close to him have even exceeded my expectations.
Yeah.
Like, I had Kalen DeBoer top 10 preseason. That's aged extremely well, despite being a preseason bold take. They've even exceeded my expectations. I thought they would reach the playoff, but they went 13-0 instead of 12-1. So I'll have to give them a bump for that. Especially if they beat Texas, that's insanity. Like, that's yeah. I think Day is really good. Let me check the chat. And then I guess, do you want to talk about anything else? I only have one more question, really, that I want to ask.
That's I've covered everything that's burning for me to talk about. If you've got one more question.
One more. I'll check the chat before then and also after that. Someone said Michigan Horned Frogs in the chat. It's funny. I think everyone agrees the SEC has the worst fans. As an overall conference, I'll say yes, but typically arrogance is a sign of either pure delusion or success. For the SEC, it's the latter, so I can somewhat excuse it. I would say Miami fans are pretty... Well, it's hard for me to say any fan base is terrible. Yeah. I'd say Trojan fans, from my interaction, have been the absolute worst. Like, I criticized their team in the preseason, and people were saying I was dogging on them. Well, here we are, and even I was too high on the Trojans in the preseason. I had them going 9-3 and 7-5. Here you are.
Well, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but I feel obligated to. I picked them to make the playoffs.
Ooh.
That was a horrible take.
Ooh.
Like, horrible doesn't even begin to.
My college football playoff picks were a combined 44-0 entering rivalry week. You want to know the reason why I only got 2 incorrect? Because why? Alabama decided to mess around, and because enough teams won 12 games that Ohio State mathematically was never going to get in without massive chaos.
Yeah.
Such a shame. But if Michigan ends up winning it all, hey, that's very good for this channel. Penn State 17-13 or something. Ole Miss looks like they have a good offense and then score 10 points the next week. That's a person's prediction.
I think Penn State shuts down Ole Miss's offense, in my opinion.
Another person said that USC, he had them going 12-0 and making the playoffs. That's Wolver Geek. So you're not alone there. A lot of people had them doing that. The problem was just Alex Grinch.
Everything.
Yeah. Everything. Well, also the offensive line. This is something that people didn't pick up on in the preseason that I somehow did. I'm not trying to sound good or anything because I'm the guy who had Michigan State preseason top 20, which is horrific. That's like it's probably just as bad of a pick if we're being honest.
Comparable, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible. Also, Minnesota top 20 and they're 5-7 and they might lose to Bowling Green in the Quick Lane Bowl. That sucks. I'm going to make a whole video about my bad and good takes within either the next week or after the season ends. But yeah, the last question I wanted to ask is, any way too early thoughts on 2024? On the 2024 Big Ten?
Way too early 2024.
If not, it's okay.
I think there's so much yet to be seen about who's going to come back, who's going to go. I think a lot is riding. The Big Ten landscape has a lot to do with whether J.J. McCarthy comes back or not. Um, I think Donovan Edwards' decision is still up in the air to some degree. I'm not sure what to expect him to do. Junior Colson, I don't think is decided yet either. He still could come back, correct? Am I wrong?
Yes.
Okay. I think who Ohio State's can. I mean, who is Ohio State going to have at quarterback? There's a big question. Who are Ohio State and Michigan? That's the Big Ten right there. Ohio State and Michigan historically are the Big Ten. I know we've got some other guys coming over, but Ohio State and Michigan historically are the Big Ten, and we don't know who's going to be at quarterback for either of those teams. So for me, predicting the Big Ten right now is just too early because I'm completely in the dark about who's going to be playing the most important position on the field for maybe the two best teams in the conference.
Yeah. That is perfectly logical, and I think that makes sense.
More logical than my USC playoff prediction.
Yeah, more logical than my what was a team that I had doing really good that flunked? I had Kansas going 10-3.
I remember you did have Kansas being really good.
But I don't think that isn't the same as Michigan State and Minnesota because of the injuries.
Yeah, and Kansas, how many did Kansas end up winning? Was it
I think they went 7-5 or 8-4.
Okay.
So if they win their bowl game, then that looks good. If they lose, then it's just mediocre.
Yeah.
Let me check actually before you get off, because this is kind of like fun. Just look, because I can gauge. Yeah. Oh. Well, this is due to injuries too. Okay. Yeah. So some bad ones that I had. This is juicy. LSU going 11-1. Pretty bad given their defense. What else? Clemson reaching the ACC championship game with an 11-1 record.
I feel like that's a prediction that everybody made, though. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, but everyone can make a bad prediction. I mean, it makes it more understandable, but
that's true.
I mean, they were 4-4 in the ACC. They were out of the race by like
horrible.
October. It was disgusting.
Terrible.
Yeah. This is awesome. Utah 12-2, reaching the Pac-12 championship game with a chance of making the playoffs if they win. You
probably did think Cam Rising would play, though.
That's true. Same with Brant Kuthi.
To be fair.
What
I
else?
think I've got to say your MSU one is probably the worst one.
Yeah. Along with Minnesota going 10-3.
Yeah, the Minnesota one's pretty far off too.
Yeah. Minnesota going 10-3. I had MSU going 8-5, and they started preseason top 20. Not 25, not 20. So that wasn't Actually, this was record-wise somewhat close. I had Oregon State going 11-2, but they were including a bowl game, but they were checked out by the end, so that was not accurate, but not horrific. I think the Minnesota one was the worst. I agree with you. That was gross.
A slight miss.
Yeah.
It happens.
It does happen. Someone said they had Texas Tech in the Big 12 title game.
Wow.
And I think Texas Tech, what did they do?
They were just under 5. Were they 5-7?
They finished the year 7-6. They beat California in the bowl game.
Okay, 7-6.
Let's see what some other people had. Sam, by the way, I got word an hour ago Michigan has gotten signatures from all 27 commits. I saw that as well.
That's big.
Yeah. And we got...
I'm glad to see the Harbaugh rumors aren't affecting any sort of commitments.
Yeah. Also, Jason Barham committed to us through the portal. Good Maryland linebacker.
Maryland linebacker, yep. I think he had a couple... I heard he had a couple... To be fair, I'm saying this only based off Instagram comments, so this information could be flawed. But I believe he had a couple of sacks against us. I know JJ went down a couple of times that game. I think he may have had a
He,
couple.
let me see. Jason Barham is a good pressure linebacker. That's all I know. Okay. Oh my gosh. Someone said they had Clemson and Wisconsin. Oh, I missed that one because Wisconsin started winning again. I had them 11-3 and winning the West and winning a New Year's
Wow.
Six bowl, and they died. I mean, they literally died.
No, they ceased to exist when they lost at home to Northwestern. Which how about Northwestern? Ah, man, I love the Northwestern story.
I do
That's
too.
cool.
They
That's
lost
cool.
to Indiana. That's when they died. Is when they
Yeah,
lost to
that's
it.
lost to Indiana and Northwestern.
Yeah, it's horrible. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's always fun to have you on. It's always good conversation. Thank you for coming on and previewing this amazing bowl game because I think it's going to be a good matchup.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun, man. Oh, I just can't wait. 12 days from now. 12 days from, isn't it? Yeah, 12 days from
Yes,
now.
it is.
We'll be watching. I'll either be on cloud nine watching Washington, Texas, or I will be not in a very good mood. Also, probably watching Washington, Texas.
Yeah, I'm going to be live reviewing both of those games back to back.
Wow, long night
Yep,
for you.
I'll make sure to have plenty of ad breaks and food so I don't starve. But yeah, that's going to be fun. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and to everyone on here, thank you so much. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and we'll see you around. Have a great night, and go blue.